The early days of the MCU actually brought us 5 different home console movie tie-in games. The first 2 Iron Man films, The Incredible Hulk, Captain America, and the first Thor movie all gave us tie-in games. You see, Sega actually had a deal with Marvel to publish games based on their movies, and that's how we ended up with 5 games that are certainly an interesting part of the MCU's history, if somewhat forgotten. So today I wanted to shine a light on one of these games in particular, and that is Thor: God of Thunder. And more specifically, I want to talk about the Nintendo 3DS port of this game. So without further ado, let's jump right into it. Thor: God of Thunder released worldwide across April and May 2011 for all platforms except the 3DS, where it launched in September of that same year. The PS3 and 360 ports of this game were developed by Liquid Entertainment, who are most famous for, I guess, the Desperate Housewives game, that's a thing. Whereas the Wii and 3DS versions of this game were developed by Red Fly Studio, who are probably most famous for porting Star Wars The Force Unleashed 2 to the Wii. So Thor: God of Thunder is an action hack and slash game with some very mild platforming elements. So before we jump into the gameplay of God of Thunder, let's talk about the story. So this game is actually non-canon to the MCU, and the plot doesn't really have much to do with the plot of the film. There are a couple of similarities, but outside of this, not very much, so let's just go from the start. The game opens up with Asgard being invaded by the Frost Giants, whilst Thor is training with Lady Sif and his brother, of course, Loki. Loki goes off to tell Odin what's happening, and Sif sadly gets fatally wounded in the fight. After the fight ends, Thor is denied retribution for this death, and just storms off to seek vengeance for himself, leaving Odin to revive Sif and then enter into the Odin sleep. However, what Thor does not realise is that Loki has been behind everything happening so far.
Wow, what a twist.
Not really.
So with Odin now in the Odin sleep and Thor off on a wild goose chase, Loki is free to take over Asgard and unleash chaos. Whilst Thor is on his quest for vengeance, he accidentally releases the creature known as Mangog, which then immediately heads to Asgard to cause chaos and kill as many things as it possibly can. Loki then switches up his plan and delays Thor coming back to Asgard for as long as he can so he can defeat Mangog and take all the glory, which sadly ends up not being the case, and eventually you all have to face off against Mangog at the end of the game. Now, interestingly enough, this plot actually takes some characters who would later appear in the MCU, like Surtur, who is of course one of the major plot points in Thor Ragnarok. Honestly, I found this plot more entertaining than the actual film itself, and that might be down to the fact that this was written by comic book writer Matt Fraction, who had worked on many different Marvel properties. The game features the return of 3 key actors from the film, and that is Chris Hemsworth as Thor himself, Tom Hiddleston as Loki, and Jamie Alexander as Lady Sif. Sadly, the rest of the cast, most notably Sir Anthony Hopkins and Idris Elba, did not return to voice their characters. I'm not being funny, Anthony Hopkins, but you were in Transformers The Last Night. I'm sure it wouldn't have hurt you to voice your character in Thor: God of Thunder.
You wretched human!
Now, before we go any further, if you are a fan of movie tie-in games, Marvel, then this channel will be perfect for you, so why not hit that subscribe button and tap the bell for notifications of my future uploads, which will in turn make you worthy of wielding Mjolnir. So anyway, let's discuss the gameplay and the controls. So as I mentioned, God of Thunder is primarily a hack and slash game, with the bulk of your time being spent in fairly enclosed environments fighting off waves upon waves of enemies. These enemies vary from frost giants to trolls to demons, I think. And on top of this, you will have the occasional boss fight mixed in. So to control Thor, you move him about either using the 3DS circle pad or the 3DS's D-pad. Pressing Y will do a light attack and pressing X will do a heavy attack. A is your charge or dash, and you press B to jump. If you hold the right shoulder button, Thor will swing Mjolnir ready to throw it by pressing Y, or if you hold the left shoulder button, Thor will swing Mjolnir in a way that blocks him from attacks, and if you press X, it will blow gusts of winds at enemies and blow them away. Which I learned about halfway through my playthrough is quite overpowered because you can just blast enemies off the side and insta-kill them. Anyway, you can combo these different button attacks in whatever way suits your playstyle, but there are definitely some that are way more overpowered than others. So as you progress through the game, you get skill points to spend on a variety of things. You can use them to upgrade Thor's health, his special energy bar, or you can use them to buy new combos, amongst other things. And soon enough I discovered that one combo was significantly more overpowered than the rest. And that is one where you hold X to knock your enemy up into the air, spam Y a few times so you hit him in the air, and then press X again to knock him back down. And as you hit the ground with your hammer, it sends them back into the air so you can rinse and repeat until your enemy is no more. Now obviously there are a few exceptions where this doesn't work, such as bosses, but for the most part you will breeze through most of the game just using that combo without any difficulty. Now you will see on the touchscreen that there are also a variety of buttons that you can tap on, and all of these pretty much cause area effect damage to your enemies whilst you're fighting. So for example, you can tap the lightning bolts to cast lightning across the area and put all the enemies in a brief state of shock. Or you can tap the Mjolnir icon on the right and that will charge it up, meaning you can cause a lot more damage when you either throw it at an enemy or hit someone with it. Later on into the game you will also be able to cast tornadoes and do wind effect, as there's certain enemies that you can't hit without doing this first. Throughout the game you will also pick up these things called runes, and you can apply these to Mjolnir to gain different effects, such as when dealing melee damage Thor regains health or he regains Odin Force, so on and so forth. And as you progress you can unlock more slots to equip runes, allowing up to 4 overall. They don't drastically change the gameplay, but they do enough to make it worth using some, especially later into the game when fights do start to ramp up and get a bit longer. So the combat itself can actually be quite satisfying. When you're pulling off cool combos, spinning around, throwing your hammer everywhere, it feels very cool, but there is a underlying sense of clunkiness to it. Sometimes enemy hitboxes don't work very well, so you'll be in the midst of a combo and have it suddenly broken. Sometimes the combos feel way too overpowered even on the harder difficulties, whereas sometimes it feels like they're doing nothing at all. There are also times throughout the game where you will need to break through parts of the environment, and the hitboxes on these environmental pieces are all over the place. Sometimes you have to hit something like 3 or 4 times for it to actually register what you've done, when you know 90% of the time when you're hitting these environmental objects they are destroyed with one hit, so it makes no sense for anything else not to do the same. There are 2 other major parts of God of Thunder's gameplay. Whilst the bulk of this is on the ground combat, there are a few flying sections where you just move your circle pad around to aim and spam the A button to shoot lightning at things. Unfortunately, the flying is quite stiff and Thor feels very unresponsive in these situations. These sections feel very arcade-like, but without any of the charm or fun that would see it in an arcade. The other major part of God of Thunder's gameplay revolves around, and I hate to say this, quick time events. And there are a lot of quick time events in this game. Every single mini-boss is ended with pretty much the same quick-time event. There are bits of the environment you have to destroy with quick-time events. Even the flying sections feature quick-time events, and they all pretty much consist of the exact same thing. Spam the Y button, press A button on the D-pad, and move on. For some of the later bosses you have to spam a button and then press a few buttons on the D-pad, but it's just the same thing, but slightly extended. Now obviously this game launched well over a decade ago and feels very much so a product of its time. Quick time events were all the rage back in the early 2010s, so I'm not surprised to see them here. Now in terms of movement, for the most part you are confined to certain areas to fight, but you do obviously have to move in between these areas. There is a small amount of platforming, and I mean a very small amount that literally revolves around you jumping up a few blocks, and I have to say I'm very glad it's not the main focus of the game because it really feels clunky and honestly can be quite glitchy. I found Thor clipping into several parts of the environment when I'm trying to jump over them, as well as enemies getting stuck in the environment. Which is frankly quite a shame, because whilst this game isn't anything special, and to be honest is quite repetitive, it's a not bad simple action game that is just let down by some buggy sections. Anyway, if you made it this far into the video, then please try and type the word Mjolnir into the comments with your eyes closed. So anyway, let's talk graphics and audio. So this is basically the Wii version of God of Thunder on a 3DS system, which is pretty impressive. The same thing happened with the Amazing Spider-Man movie tie-in game. It was cool to see it on the 3DS, but for the Wii as a console is quite insulting. So visually this game is all over the place, to be honest. Some of the environments look really nice, some of them look really ugly, but the biggest crime that God of Thunder has committed is repetitiveness. The first few levels of the game all take place on this ice planet, and oh my god, it's so boring to look at after about 10 minutes. It all looks exactly the same and is pretty much just one monotone colour. And to be honest, you can pretty much repeat that criticism for every section of the game, as all of these levels feel like they go on for quite a while, so you're just looking at copied and pasted environments for ages and ages. Thor himself looks pretty decent considering this is from the early days of the 3DS, and some of the other characters don't look too bad either. Again, because you're fighting so many enemies, a lot of them are just the same models over and over again, so it can get quite boring, but considering when this game came out, they don't look awful. The game runs pretty consistently without any major frame rate dips as well, even when you have a lot of enemies and a big boss on the screen all at once, which is pretty impressive and quite nice to see. In terms of the soundtrack, legendary game composer Inon Zur, I'm so sorry if I pronounced that incorrectly, composed the soundtrack for this game, and it suits it really well. Zur is famous for working on such major franchises like Dragon Age, Fallout, The Prince of Persia, and most recently on Starfield, and he's also pretty well known for making very good trailer music. The soundtrack helps to make the large battles in this game feel truly epic and mythological, like they're supposed to. As well as this soundtrack, as I mentioned before, Chris Hemsworth, Tom Hiddleston and Jamie Alexander all return to their roles from the film here. And this isn't just some quick cash-in for the actors, they do actually put in a good effort here. Especially Tom Hiddleston, who is having a blast as Loki, as he always does.
Then all the 9 worlds would slip into chaos. But he is well protected. Someone would have to open the mighty gates of Asgard, along the Rainbow Bridge. And the plan would need some way to neutralize the all-seeing Heimdall.
The audio quality for these recordings are also really good and help make you feel a bit more immersed into the world of the game. In all honesty, it's a shame that the actual game itself wasn't as good because the soundtrack and the dialogue had such effort put into it. Now, in terms of critical response, across the board, the reaction to Thor God of Thunder was definitely not a positive one. The PS3 and 360 versions of the game scored 39 and 38 out of 100 respectively on Metacritic. Weirdly, the 3 Nintendo versions of this game actually scored higher, with the Wii scoring 56, the DS scoring 64, and the 3DS scoring the lower of the 3 with 55. However, that at least takes those 3 versions out of the unfavourable into the mixed or average response. However, the user score for God of Thunder on the 3DS is lower with a 4.2 out of 10. However, it actually only has 2 user reviews, with one a 7 out of 10 and one a 2 out of 10, so pretty divisive, I guess. At the end of the day, Thor God of Thunder is a pretty forgettable movie tie-in game. It has some good ideas and some pretty cool mechanics, but it's let down by very repetitive gameplay, repetitive visuals, and some very silly glitches. I would say if you're a big fan of Marvel or Thor, then at least for the story I would say check this game out, but if you're not, then just give this one a miss. As per VG charts, the game would go on to sell approximately 100,000 copies, which, in all honesty, isn't very much. But hey, for some reason, if you want to buy a physical copy of this game and check it out, you can pick it up for like £10 now. So that's one plus to this game not being the greatest. Anyway, that takes us to the end of our look at Thor God of Thunder for the 3DS. What do you guys think of this game? Have you played it? Do you like it? Let me know in the comments down below because I'd love to hear your opinions. If you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to leave a like, and if you haven't done so already, subscribe and tap that bell for notifications. Remember, you'll be worthy and you can wield Mjolnir. Anyway, thank you very much for watching, and I will see you in my next video. Bye bye.
You can't defeat me.
No, I know. But he can.
No.
Oh!